How can we even be sure that this is the place?
When they called me, they told me I'd be too much of a coward to come face them. Even told me where they were. Just can't believe they were so close and were able to keep anyone from finding out. I think Dad had his suspicions. A few times I caught him in his study with all these old maps of the town and marking them up. I don't think he knew for sure and didn't want to risk coming alone to find out.
It doesn't seem like the kind of place that I'd want to set up, I said, glancing around at the apparent nest of the Chosen. A rundown and abandoned amusement park. I don't know what I was expecting, but it hadn't been that.
Okay, there is no way in hell.
Come on, V, it's the only way.
I'd rather walk naked through the gates than go barefoot into there.
The hatch to the sewer pipe, nestled near the river's edge beneath the decaying dock, was twisted open. A stench of death wafted in from the dark hole, but it was the best way into the vampire's lair. It was obvious why they couldn't just firebomb the place and call it a day. Sure, the boardwalk was barely holding together, and the amusement park hadn't seen a happy customer in years. But the warehouse next door was uncomfortably close to Newport's shiny new developments, just a 20-minute drive from Puce. The city had poured years into revitalizing the area, blending historic charm with modern upgrades, or so they tried to market. Unfortunately, this little stretch left only one way in and out. Unless you fancy to swim in the Ohio River, and let's be honest, that probably is more dangerous than anything lurking in the warehouse. We kept our distance, scoping out the place through binoculars. Even from afar, it was hard to miss the human security guards stationed at the entrance and patrolling the rickety walkways. It seemed like overkill for such a rundown plot of land, but considering the neighborhood, I guess they had their reasons. As we stood near the sewer pipe's entrance, we tried to coax Victoria into the stinking hole.
V, it's less than a block away. We could be in and out in 10 minutes. If there's nothing here, that is.
Yeah, less than a block. Barefoot through the sewer.
And Corey sighed, stepping out of his dress shoes and nodding at them.
Best I can do, V.
They were huge on her, but seemed to get the job done. The sewers looked as bad as they smelled, and Corey oriented himself as he pointed more or less towards the chasm of blackness.
This way,
He muttered, voice muffled as he pinched his nose. And we pulled out our cell phones, the dim light revealing new, disgusting details in the sludge around us. Hugging the walls and ducking beneath the grimy, low-hanging ceiling, we navigated through this stinking tunnel. The pipes above were slowly dripping into the foul trench, but at least the flow was minimal this early. Dawn had already broken when we descended, and by now, true daylight was probably creeping in. Overhead, I could hear the rumble of cars and catch glimpses of sunlight through the grates, while my bag softly thudded against my leg as we trudged forward. I had packed the bag after the business with Mrs. Black, a simple kit for emergencies, in case she ever decided to show up again. But as I was putting it together, I remembered that time with the succubi, and threw in a few more things. Then I thought, what about vampires? And by the time that I was done, I had a go bag prepped for just about any supernatural nightmare. Vials of holy water, silver crosses, wooden stakes, garlic, religious symbols, rosaries, even a stole Father Pierce left behind during the Skinwalker incident. It had turned into a Swiss Army knife for dealing with the undead, and I was already researching what else I might need for future encounters. Better safe than sorry, right? I bumped into Victoria when she suddenly stopped, nearly sending her tumbling into the ditch. She wobbled, regaining her balance, and shot me a withering glare.
looks like we found it.
Corey's nasally voice drifted back, and I peered around Victoria to see a thick steel door with a heavy padlock. Looks like a dead end. I wonder if there's somewhere else that we can... I began, but before I finished, I heard a soft snap, and Corey had already yanked the chains apart, letting them and the lock clatter to the ground. It's easy to forget sometimes that you're traveling with beings who could snap you in half if they felt like it. Corey often seemed more human than I did, and Victoria could pass for any girl that you might see on a runway. Or working a pole, I suppose. They looked human, and I sometimes forgot these were the very creatures that I'd packed my emergency kit for. I was glad that they were on my side, but it was a good reminder to stay sharp. The door screeched open with an ungodly wail, and if I thought that the sewer smelled bad, what lay beyond nearly knocked me out cold. There's really no way to explain the stench unless you've been to a slaughterhouse. In high school, we took a field trip to one. Yeah, real educational. And the worst part wasn't seeing animals slaughtered. After years of watching my dad work at the mortuary, blood and guts, they simply didn't faze me. It was the smell that got to me. Piss, blood, and bile, and rot all blending together. Mortuaries are supposed to be clean. Ours always was. I expected the slaughterhouse to smell like bleach and disinfectant, but no. It was pure, unfiltered horror. And this place smelled just like that. Piss, blood, bile, and rot. Victoria wrinkled her nose.
Yep, this is the place. No offense.
She quickly added, patting Corey. And Corey shook his head.
None taken. Comparing us to these things would be an insult. Dad and I like to keep our feeding clean, dignified even. These animals just gorge themselves, leaving a mess everywhere.
I opened my bag and I strapped on a belt with a holster, holding a squirt gun filled with holy water. I shoved a couple of stakes into the belt for good measure and pulled out my cross, draping it over my chest. Now, I realized that I probably looked ridiculous, but for once, no one was cracking jokes. All right, guys, let's move, I said, glancing at the nearby grate. The sun is rising faster. And with that, we marched into the vampire nest. Single file, while I brought up the rear, my holy water pistols ready for action.
Well, that's not exactly what I expected to find.
Corey whispered, bending over the staked vamp. He was bigger than Corey, looked more like a soccer hooligan than anything, and someone had shoved what looked like a fence slate into his heart. His eyes roamed around, and malice behind them promised suffering if he got up, and Corey reached down with both hands as he took his head off with a quick twist. The body went limp, deflating some, and he tossed it further back down the tunnel as we proceeded. It was the 15th vampire that we had passed in such a state. Some lay across the floor and some lay in their coffins, but all of them lay staked through the heart. And I was beginning to wonder if the hit squad had gotten there early, but I had to assume that they wouldn't leave them alive behind them. The tunnel held quite a few concrete alcoves, each of them housing a coffin, and the lids were off of their owners, either laying on the ground or lay staked in their beds. Who could have done this? I whispered, stepping gingerly over another vampire as Corey knelt to finish him.
Whoever it was, they knew what they were doing.
Why do you say that? I asked, stumbling in a pool of black blood.
These guys were killed with a single stroke. I don't think most of them saw it coming, even the ones in the hall. They didn't fight their attacker. They were hit, and whoever did it moved on. Make sure you keep behind me, Fee,
he said, pulling an arm behind him like a guardrail.
It'll kill you if you get staked. I can survive it as long as they don't yank my head off, which doesn't seem like something they're doing.
I don't think that this is... But before I could finish, there were quick feet coming around the corner ahead of us, and we all hit the wall, staying as flat as we could as a couple of guards wandered by. They would have passed for street people if we had been above, but as the smell of them hit me, there was no mistaking them for anything but monsters. The smell of blood hung around them like cologne, and I wondered how anyone could mistake them for people at all.
I can't believe I had to come with you. What are you, 5? Hey, you know we have to move in 2-man groups. Singles are how the ghost keeps getting people.
We pressed up against the stone, staying as still as we could. But the passage ahead was apparently a crossroad, and they were coming from the entrance up ahead. We were about 30 feet from each other, and the two walking into the corridor on their way to the other entrance, and they hadn't noticed us yet. If we were lucky, they wouldn't.
Jesus, give me a break. It ain't no ghost. It's probably one of those hellhound bastards who's gotten in and is using the surprise to catch our guys unaware. The second we find him, though, it's gonna be kill on sights.
You really think it's... But he shut up as the other one shushed him. And Corey tensed, sensing the jig might be up. The creature inhaled, seeming to taste the air as it sniffed, and I felt Victoria prepare for violence too. The pair of them were clearly used to hitting hard and fast, and if one of these two got away, then we could be in trouble.
What? What is it?
The other asked as his partner took another whiff.
I could have sworn I smelled something. Let's keep moving. Don't want to get caught standing around.
And they moved on, heading towards whatever they were doing, and the three of us breathed a sigh of relief. So we kept moving, but no new vampire corpses turned up. Instead, the ones that we encountered seemed to be very much alive, or whatever you'd call it, and on high alert. They were all buzzing about some ghost haunting the tunnels, which had everyone on edge. Even so, we didn't stumble into any large groups. Malcolm might have been right. These vampires couldn't function properly in the daylight. The ones who were up were all jittery but not very sharp, and some looked like they were sleepwalking, probably making it easy for this ghost to mess with them. We were lucky. Right up until we weren't.
How big is this place?
Victoria whispered.
Feels like we've been walking forever.
And Corey shrugged.
No clue. We could have gone back into the sewer, for all I...
But that was when we heard the voices. These three were different from the ones that we'd met before. These were less like regular people, and the voices were more refined. And it was like listening to someone from a different period or somewhere else entirely. They were unlikely to be fooled by us if we hit the wall, and Corey started looking for places to hide.
That ghost ain't no good for no one. I am aware, Thomas,
came the reply, a vague Creole accent to the tone.
We stand on the precipice of conquering our eldest rival, the oldest rival of our people, and now some spook is wandering the halls and killing the chosen without much effort. If you can't find them, then I will find someone who can.
They were getting closer. Their voices bounced off the walls oddly, and when Corey found the outline of the door in the stone, he swallowed his low hiss of triumph.
This shadow would do well to move on while they have the chance. It is nothing to dispose of some pawns, but they have done nothing to thin the apostles. We can make more sheep, so long as the big players are not harmed.
Some unseen mechanism locked the door, but Corey had snapped it and let us before the three of them could see us. And I hadn't really heard the third one as clear until I was behind the door, but as his voice settled over me, I felt a chill run up me. Listening to him was like being covered in freezing water.
It all matters so little in the long run. We will achieve our goals, whether the rebels like it or not. Let them fight. Let them struggle. The end will be the same.
And they walked past the door, the three of them moving quietly enough to make me think that they might be floating, and Corey leaned against the door in the hopes that they would think that it was closed.
That was Gabriel,
he whispered, and I realized that he was right before I had time to think about it much.
It has to be Dark Prince. I've been around old ones before, but that one...
He searched for the words and came up short.
We have to find Dad and your mom and get...
But he was cut off by a sound from behind us. It was the sound of chains, of guttural growls that ripped across the stones like tearing flesh, and we turned to find ourselves in a room with long pens and chained creatures. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I realized that they weren't creatures at all. Not really. They were hellhounds.
What is this place?
Victoria whispered. It's the kennel, said a raspy voice from the stall behind us, and I turned to find an older wolf in rags leaning against the wall in his chains. The others here looked feral, completely out of their minds, but this one seemed different, more in control. His fur was gray, and the chains binding him were thicker and shorter, as if they knew that he was more dangerous. His eyes were closed and his face expressionless, showing no hint of emotion. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was one of Jericho's wolves, one of the ones who had sworn alliance to the god of death himself. Are you Mr. Carroll? I asked, remembering how Cato had said that he'd been missing. And the old wolf nodded. Little Joe sent you to find me. Not sure why the kid thought I'd still be alive, but I imagine that he's running the show, now that his old man has gone to rest. And I shook my head. No, we're here looking for... But Victoria squeaked and jumped back as one of the hellhounds hit the end of his lead and nearly took a chunk out of her arm. She had wandered too close to some of the other residents of the kennel, and they had taken it badly. Corey stood near her, bringing her in close and hissing at the beast as it barked and strained, and I wondered why Caro was the only one who had avoided becoming a feral monster.
Don't mind them,
Caro rasped, his voice rough.
The 3rd and 4th generation hounds are lucky if they ever hear the song of Pluto. They call themselves Cerberus, but they have forgotten what that even means. Me, I still hear the old man's voice, reminded me that I might yet win a noble death. And sure, I snap and snarl when the vamps come through, same as the rest. But I remember who I am.
I glanced at the 8 or 9 of the other wolves huddling in their pens. What did they do to them?
They broke them, snapped their bones, spilled their blood, put a crack in their soul. Then they fed them so that way they could heal up and go through it all over again. They started feeding them the flesh of their victims, something that drives us mad. Pushed them over the edge, it did. I've been eating rats, giving my portions to the others. Not exactly satisfying, but keeps my mind sharp. We train these kids, teach them how to endure captivity, prepare them for the POW type treatment. They don't help none. They don't have the heart for it. They're not fit for the Roman arms.
And he paused, catching himself shaking his head as if clearing a fog.
I am sorry. Guess I'm losing it too. I take it that you're here looking for the other hostages.
And I nodded. Yeah, they took my mom and Corey's dad. Do you have any clue where they might have them? He shook his head slowly, his hair flopping messily.
Believe it or not, I haven't seen much beyond this cell. But I've heard that they've got similar setup for some clergy members around here. Their plan is to sedate us, make us manageable, and hand us back to Cerberus or the church. When we wake up and turn on them, it'll show absolute chaos in the ranks. Can you imagine Cato and his boys' faces when they see us stand up and start tearing into their security? Pure pandemonium. The hopelessness. God. The hopelessness.
He laughed again, the sound laced with mania. And Mr. Caro was slipping, but maybe we could still help him, if only to give him the noble death that he craved. If I cut you loose, I asked hesitantly, what are you going to do?
Free him,
he said, nodding towards the others.
Kill as many chosen as we can before they bury us. I'm not delusional enough to think that we're getting out of here alive. Even if we did, they'd hunt us down. No, better make this place our tomb and give these pups an honorable end.
Can you free them if we free you?
Carl chuckled darkly. Kid, if I hadn't been surviving on rats for 3 months, I would have freed myself already. They know I'm old, so they chained me up tighter than the rest. But trust me, if I get loose, I can still bring the havoc.
And I looked at Corey and Victoria.
Can either of you get him loose?
And Victoria smiled, moving over to the wall and looking at the ring bolts holding one of the chains to the wall before ripping it down like I might a towel rack. And a few minutes later, Mr. Caro was rubbing his wrists and testing his legs.
Yeah, you three might want to go. These kids might not attack me, but be open season to anyone who doesn't smell like a friend.
And Corey went to check the door, wanting to know if the 3 big wigs had gone. And as I turned to go, Mr. Caro remembered something.
Wait. Maybe I can help you a little more. Now, I wouldn't lie to you none when I told you that I haven't seen much of this place. When I first arrived here, they dragged me before this Gabriel fella, and he asked me all these kind of questions. I mostly told him to go to hell. But even half dead, I still remember the way. 2 lefts, a right, another left. It's the second door on the left.
Your mom or your dad are important somehow. Probably took them there. I thanked him and he wished me luck as we headed into the hallway again. Corey was a little dubious about the directions, but it wasn't like we had much else to go by. We had taken our second left when we finally met this mysterious ghost that everyone was so crazy about.
You sure it was 2 lefts?
Corey was asking, and I was telling him that I was sure when something fell off the ceiling and knocked the wind out of him. That was a trick since I hadn't been too sure Corey breathed in the first place, but whatever it was that had hit him just right. He crumbled and folded up like a bug as something hit him before any of us could react and shoved a foot of wood into his back. Corey howled like a run-over cat, and as Victoria turned to strike, it lifted something familiar and she fell back hissing and covering her face. A harsh light came off the silver cross the thing held, and by the light I recognized the person who was seemingly staking one of my friends and warding off another. It was my mom. Mom! Where the hell did you come from? I blurted, not sure what else to say in such a situation. Tyler, language! She barked, but seemed to recognize that it was me in that instant. Tyler? What are you doing here? Jesus! You shouldn't be here. You're in terrible danger. You need to leave right now. You have to... But her words were cut off as Victoria put a hand around her throat. She dropped the cross in her surprise, and the succubi was about 2 seconds from snapping her neck. V, no, it's my mom. Put her down.
She hurt Corey,
Victoria hissed, screeching as the cross came up shining. Victoria dropped her, and Mom massaged her throat as she held her at bay. She reached over, gripping the stake, and pulled it out as she held it up to show that it was no longer in Corey. And she backed towards me, hands up, and the succubus calmed down a little. I'm sorry. I didn't know who any of you were. Now get up, son. You're fine. And my arm is getting tired. Corey got up shakily, rubbing his chest as the hole closed.
Pleasure to see you again, Mrs. Garvey.
Likewise, Cornelius, she whispered, and as Victoria cooed over him, Mom came closer. She clearly intended to give me an earful and didn't want to attract attention. What in God's name are you doing here? Trying to rescue you and Mr. Von Trask, I added hastily. I filled her in on everything that had happened and what was about to go down. She nodded thoughtfully. If that old vamp is anywhere, it'll be in Gabriel's chambers. I have been looking for him too, hoping to nip this in the bud. I'll come with you. Maybe I can help you get out of here before the bullets start flying. Mom, I'm not sure that that's a good idea. You could get seriously hurt. I began to protest, but she cut me off with her serious mom voice. Tyler James Garvey. I may be old, but I can handle myself. I'm coming with you. End of discussion. And Mom and I grabbed our gear, while Victoria and Corey took the lead. I was taken aback by this new version of my mother. Who was this? This was far from the woman who had tucked me in at night, picked out my school clothes, and cut the crusts off of my sandwiches. This was a feral creature. A wild woman straight from the jungles of Cambodia, and I was honestly a little scared of her. And as we slunk along, she glanced over at me, clearly aware of my scrutiny, and smiled faintly in the dim light. I suppose that you have some questions. Yeah, a couple. Who the heck are you? And what have you done with my mother? And she laughed. It's still me. Just a different part of me. So you're the same woman who had Dad kill spiders, who was anxious about talking to people on the phone, who scared off the Faytart trying to seduce your brother, she added smugly. Okay, touche. I took a moment to get to the heart of it. How are you doing all of this? Do you remember how I told you I met your father? Yeah, you were fleeing from family, the overly religious zealots, I replied, nodding. Well, they were overzealous, yes, but it was more about my refusal to enter the family trade. My last name isn't Belmont. Like I told your father, She sighed, looking away. I am Margaret Van Helsing. And my eyes widened. Wait, Like in the movies? I said, surprised. I figured I was a long way from believing that the Van Helsings were real. No. Well, yes, but those movies don't show how it really is. I trained as a young girl to hunt monsters. I was meant to take some of the hell out of this earth. Okay, and when exactly have you had time to practice these skills? Well, it got a little easier once you kids started going to school. I wanted to leave it all behind me, but the training was such an integral part of my life that I found myself practicing even during daily chores. Once you kids were older, I could start running and practicing, and I was likely one of the deadliest housewives in 3 counties. Did Dad know? I asked, bracing myself for an answer that I already suspected. No. Your father was the trusting type. He knew I had a unique skill set, but he never realized that I understood the creatures that he dealt with better than he did. That's why I hated that he pushed you into this and why I wouldn't let him tell you about the other side. He's the son of a long line of morticians, all following the trail of black envelopes. It is their legacy and their curse, and I hoped that you wouldn't get trapped in it. I wanted you to choose your own path, but now it feels like I have failed. And I shook my head, trying to suppress a smile. No, Mom, you didn't fail. This is what I have always wanted to do. I may have been oblivious to the whole creature angel thing, but I'm learning fast and doing pretty well at it. But I was cut off by a piercing scream, unmistakably Malcolm's echoing down the hall. We reached the end of the corridor, and there was no question where it had come from. A single door stood ajar, the light inside thick and unwholesome, practically begging us to enter. It might as well have had a neon sign blinking, "Trap!" But as time quickly passing by, we didn't have many options. Cerberus wouldn't hold back for our sake. A vampire, a succubus, and a mortician would be a small price to pay for severing the head of the serpent. Okay, but Mom was already moving ahead. I'd considered it before, but Mom was unlike her friends in many ways. She never suffered from the usual ailments of aging. She was surprisingly very fit. No complaints of arthritis or rheumatism, no cane or walker. She moved with surprising agility, and when she surged forward, flinging her arm out as she reached the door, it caught me off guard. I was in my late 20s, and I couldn't have moved that smoothly. Inside, there were angry grunts, and Mom was already reaching into her housecoat for something as she stepped into the doorway. And we entered to find 3 vampires down, thin stakes protruding from their chest like chopsticks, while 2 others struggled to pry the wooden missiles from their shoulders. Malcolm leaned against the wall, looking worse for wear, beaten and possibly unconscious. And standing over him, growling and trying to yank the wood from his arm, was the last person that I ever expected to see.
Derek? What are you doing here?
And Derek grinned, prying the wood out as he tossed it to the ground. Taking full advantage of my reward, you little shit. Gabriel told me that I could take my time with your dad if I wanted to. The other vampire hissed as he lunged at us, but Victoria caught him by the throat, and the wall shook as she smashed him against the thick beam.
It was you.
Corey said, his voice making it sound like it should have been obvious.
You've been the one telling these assholes how to thwart us. You're the reason they know who our clients were, or our business holdings like. Everything.
Yeah, no shit, Derek said. Surprised it took you this long to figure it out. How else do you think that they were doing it?
I don't know. Dad always assumed you were...
But Derek scoffed, his foot slamming into the side of limp Malcolm. Nah, kid. They offered me the one thing that your dad refused to give me. I was sick of being a Renfield, a slave to your family. I wanted to be a real vampire, but Malcolm always told me the same thing. Patience, patience, it's always something that can't be rushed. Well, fuck him. Gabriel gave me what I wanted after his guys brought me back from the dinner party. But it's not like it wasn't part of the plan. And I got everything that I wanted. Now, I don't have to fetch and grab for you sorry lot. I can be my own creature. And I can get my revenge for years of you two looking down on me. Corey's face had taken that same feral look that I saw earlier, and he skinned his teeth back as he got ready to launch himself at Derek.
Give me my dad back, and I won't tear your head off in this filthy sewer.
Come get it, little boy, Derek growled, and the two slammed into each other like a freight train. Victoria was still grappling with the other vampire, and Mom was glancing around the room like she was missing something.
Where is he? She breathed out. He has to be somewhere around here. I've looked everywhere else.
Who? I asked, reaching into my pocket as I grabbed one of the globes of the holy water that I had brought from the house. It wouldn't happen to be me that you're looking for, would it? Came a cold, oily voice from behind us. I got half a glance at the snow-white face of an ancient vampire before opening its mouth like a serpent and trying to swallow me whole. My mother charged forward, swinging one of the small stakes at the thing as it tried to flinch out of the way. I was forced to back away a step, its path leading it into my mother as it pushed her to the ground. I tried to keep my feet, but something popped in my ankle, and I was on the ground before I could get my balance. I tried to toss the globe at him, but my aim was off, and it was already too late by the time that it broke across the wall behind him. You nosy little bitch. I should have seen what you were from the start. I won't make the same mistake underestimating you again.
Tyler!
She yelled.
Run!
But she never finished. Her neck snapped like dry twigs, and suddenly she was nothing but a limp rag on the floor of the sewer. This was Gabriel. Who else could it be? And as he turned slowly to face me, a red haze descended over my vision. My hands felt leaden as I reached for the last of the holy water globes, but it seemed my luck was finally run out. My hand felt leaden as I reached for the last of the holy water globes, but my hand and arm was not responding to my request. I tried to get up and put weight on my injured ankle, and a sharp twinge shot through me as I collapsed, wincing as the ball beneath me shattered. The sounds of battle raged around me, but I realized my friends wouldn't make it in time. This was it. I was out of tricks, out of luck, and now the monsters would feast on me. And then a cold hand clamped around the back of my neck, icy and terrifying, and I braced myself for the moment that I had seen in countless horror movies, when the vampire pounces to tear apart its prey. But instead, he rolled me over. As his moonlit face loomed above me, fresh dread washed over me. I like to look my prey in the eyes, he said, his voice dripping with malice. But don't worry, Mortician. I'm not gonna kill you. From now on, you'll be my little blood bag. I can't promise you'll enjoy making me money as much. But first, how about a little sample? He leaned down, his needle-sharp teeth descending towards my throat, then suddenly screamed loud that I feared my eardrums might burst. He pulled back, his hands sizzling and reddening, and I scuttled away as he stared at his fingers in bewilderment. His alien face was a mask of confusion, but it didn't take me long to realize what had happened. The holy water was still on me. And before he could connect the dots, I lunged for my squirt gun and blasted a stream of holy water into his dazed face. He screamed again, recoiling from the second spray as I watched droplets eat away at his skin. He was quick, dodging my stinging attacks, and with the element of surprise gone, I found myself on the defensive. And I hit him once more, but his vicious backhand sent me crashing against the cold stones of the sewer floor, my vision swirling. No more tricks, and no more games! He bellowed, glaring down at me. You're as much of an irritant as your mother, and I'm tired of this. I was going to make things comfortable for you,
But now, you will suffer.
His cold fingers reached for my throat, and I could tell the holy water on my skin was burning him, but he fought through the pain, his grip tightening. My breath was cutting off, and my vision blurred as my lungs spasmed. And just as I thought it was over, the ground shook violently, and Gabriel looked up, confusion turning to alarm as a second quake sent stones crashing down on us, enveloped in a fine mist of ancient mortar.
What the fresh hell is this?
He hissed, and before he could finish, a third, more violent tremor collapsed to the ceiling, bathing him in an intense, blinding light. Hollywood had gotten one thing right. The hand choking my throat suddenly released as the head of the serpent crumbled to dust around me, the sun scorching him to a crisp. I sat up, bewildered by the turn of events. And as my friends continued to battle nearby, I crawled over to my mom and collapsed beside her. She looked terrified and confused in her final moments, and I held her tightly, weeping as Corey and Victoria fought on. And at some point, another body tumbled to the sunlight, turning to ash, but I couldn't tell if it was an enemy or a friend. My ears began to ring. The echoing sounds of boots filled the hall, blending with the chaos around me. But my gaze remained fixed on my mother. Her eyes glazed over, and all sense of life and soul was gone.